We're continuing our Christmas conversation. Last week we spent time talking about family and how valuable, important family is, and how in our families that may be one of the few places that we find a great opportunity to talk about Jesus. I know some of you have Christian families. Your family is Christ throughout, but some of you, Christ may not be part of that family. And so your opportunity to speak Christ into those situations is your great opportunity, your great blessing. Today, though, I want to look at a different demographic of people when we talk about Christmas. And so I want us to look at the people who are often the lowly and the left out. The people that society ignores, and maybe we ourselves ignore. I want to tell you a story, particularly about Elliot and I. I made the comment last week that he has a tender heart. And I didn't intend, this story happened this week, so it actually worked out perfectly. But we went and saw the Nutcracker on Friday morning together. And so that's the ballet down at the Louisville Palace. And so we went and saw that, and we finished at perfect time for lunch. And right there by the palace is this little pizza place called Spinelli's. Have you ever been there? Okay. You have. Good. I've driven by it, I don't know how many times. Never been there. Always looked kind of cool because I just saw from the outside, it looked really neat. And so this time I'm like, we're here. Like it's a half a block away. We're going to go there and eat pizza. And so we go in, we order a pizza, and we sit down, and it's like I'm totally his. For this moment, I'm like, whatever you want, kid. You want the chocolate chip cookie. You want the slice of pizza that's like, the pizza was like this. It was a massive piece of pizza. I don't care. Like, this is dad and son. Let's do it right. And of course, he picks the seat by the front window. Like, we're right by the door. And I make the comment, I'm like, bud, like every time the door opens, the wind's going to come blowing in. But he wants to sit right by the window. While we're sitting there and our food's arrived, we're eating, this gentleman comes by in a wheelchair outside. And I had seen him roll from about the palace direction. That's kind of the south side of where we're at, rolling north. I had seen in his lap this tattered cardboard sign. And he would roll so far and would stop. He would roll so far and stop. I don't carry cash. I'm of that generation that if you don't take a credit card or if I can't Venmo you the money, you're going to have to wait. Like I'm going to have to go to an ATM. I pay ATM fees because I don't bank locally. I'm that guy. And so I'm like, I don't have anything. But the guy looks at me. It's that awkward moment where I'm inside the glass. He's outside the glass. He looks at me. And in my heart, I wanted to do something, but I don't have money. And so I'm like, you know what? Well, hey, give a smile. And he does the same back. Like it's a very cordial moment. And he just rolls a little further on and stops. Rolls a little further on and stops. Well, Elliot notices this exchange occur between me and him, and Elliot doesn't sit still at any point if you know him well. He is constantly spinning and turning, and so he has seen this man come rolling along, and as he has seen him come rolling along, his tender heart also is pricked by this gentleman in the wheelchair. What I failed to realize is that Elliot rode a school bus that morning to the palace. And as he was on the school bus, he found a penny on the school bus. I asked him if the penny was heads up or tails up, because to me, that's good luck or bad luck. And so he told me, he said, well, it was tails up. I said, well, that's a bad luck penny. He asked, Dad, can I give this penny to that guy? And I'm like, you sure can, buddy. Like, it's a bad luck penny, but that's a joke, bad joke. He takes the penny out of his pocket and he runs to that guy out at the street. The guy's a couple doors down at this point, and he gives it to him. And in my head, I'm thinking, what does a penny buy today? That's my thought before my son runs out of Spinelli's. And by the way, he runs well ahead of me. Like I'm still in the chair when Elliot's passing to get to the guy. And he gives them this penny. And in my head, I'm thinking, what does a penny buy today? But as I make it out the door of Spinelli's, I'm at the corner. They're a few doors down, and I see Elliot with this gentleman. And in my head, I instantly realized it was never about the money. It was never about the penny. It wasn't the amount of the value that actually mattered as much as it was the heart that mattered. That penny may not have done anything for that gentleman. I don't know. It may have been everything to that gentleman. In my heart, though, the penny was not the value. It was so much about watching a person care for another person. So we sit back down, we begin to eat, and then at that moment's where the real story begins, because Elliot then begins to just tell me how sad it is that so many people didn't even look at that guy. Didn't even give him attention. As a matter of fact, he says, Dad, it's like some of the people even looked away and looked up when they were around him because they didn't want to see him. And my son, for the next 2 minutes, lectures me on this reality that the world is constantly looking away from some people. And I have to admit that there's a part of me that's breaking inside because I know I'm guilty of looking away from some people. And I know that through the eyes of a 7-year-old, he didn't look away. There is a whole part of our world that we look away from. But the story of Christmas is the story where God does not look away from those people, that God is looking towards those people. Today in Luke chapter 2, I want to start in verse 8, and I want to go through verse 20. And as we go through this, I want us just to focus on the person or the people that God deliberately went to. It's a people that we wouldn't look at. It's a people that we would have ignored. It's a people that would not have struck our radar, but it was the people that God saw and reached out to. This is Luke chapter 2, verse 8. There were shepherds living out in the field nearby, that keeping watch over their flock at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You'll find a baby wrapped in clothes lying in a manger." And suddenly a great cloud of heavenly hosts appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." And when the angels had left and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that's happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. And when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told to them about the child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. As I look at this story, why did God announce the birth of a Savior to shepherds? Why didn't he go to the powerful? Why didn't he go to the elite? Why didn't he go to the people who were the social media, like the popular people on social media? Why did he go to people who had a microphone and could talk it loudly? Why did God choose shepherds? And the first thing I notice is that a shepherd was not a very popular person. Matter of fact, shepherds were really considered unclean people. Can you imagine why? Think about it with me for a minute. What did a shepherd do? They spent time with the flock. He's out there hanging out with sheep. Y'all been around sheep? How clean are sheep? Not disgusting, but they're not clean. I mean, they're not like, like a pig. But I'm not going to go hang out with the sheep. And oh, by the way, we're not talking about like they lived in the farmhouse while the sheep lived out in the pen. No, like they lived among the sheep. They slept with the sheep. They did everything with the sheep. Their lives were all consumed with taking care of the sheep. They weren't a clean individual. And oh, by the way, do sheep know that it's Sunday? Do sheep know that it's time to go to church? And they're like, oh, hey, we're going to wait right here for you to go to church, come back. And oh, no animal's going to bother us. We're going to be right here. No, sheep don't know that. And so when animals came to attack, they didn't know if it was a Sunday or not. So shepherds didn't get days off. Shepherds didn't go to church. Shepherds didn't get to practice their religion. They were stuck with animals all day long. They were the lower class of society. They were just workers, and that's what they did. On top of really being an unclean person, they were often known as thieves. Can you imagine you're walking with sheep, you got a whole herd and you're walking along. What are your sheep eating? They're probably eating someone else's grass. It's not like you had really defined property lines. They didn't put up fences. So they're eating other people's grass. They're eating possibly other people's produce. And as a shepherd, do you know how easy it is to walk along and be like, oh, this is so-and-so's apple tree. Look, how easy is that to do? And to some degree, we'd say, well, it's just an apple. It's just a this or it's just a that. But shepherds then got this name of being thieves because they took things that weren't necessarily theirs. They weren't the smartest people. They weren't the most desirable people. The good example of a shepherd is actually David. If you know the story of David, before David became publicly announced or confirmed as king, he knew he was king. He had been anointed as king. But David's dad shows up with David's 7 older brothers, knowing that one of them is going to be king. And guess what happens? They're like, well, we left David at home because he's taking care of the sheep. He's the runt of the litter. He's the shepherd. So when we think of shepherds, they're not popular people. They're not the people that you want telling the news. They were the lowest of status. But I think Jesus comes to the lowest of people. He comes to people like the homeless folks. I know some of them make more money begging than they do working. There's a news article about that at some point. I know sometimes they're going to go out and buy drugs and alcohol. I know sometimes they're going to go do the things with money that I don't necessarily think's wise. But I also know that they are an invisible part of our society. That when many of us pull to an intersection where one of them may be, we look straight forward or we look at our phone because we don't want to catch eyes with them. They only become visible when they enter into our space, when they walk into our door. And then our goal is to clean them up because we don't want them to make our place dirty. We don't want to mess up our house. We tend to value people based on a rate of return rather than a rate of giving. You see, we look at what people can give me. How can someone bless me? How can the ultimate relationship, how can this be a mutual place? How do we work together? And God looks at a rate of giving. He gave Jesus. He said every person is worth this sacrifice. Even the person who yells condemnation and damnation upon the name of God, he says, I would still sacrifice for that person. God gave Jesus for the shepherd. God gave Jesus for the homeless folks. God gave Jesus for my son. God gave Jesus for me. What is the value of a person? How much are they worth? You see, when I look at this value of humanity, what a person is worth, I see the angels come into this scene, and this is about verses 10 through 11, and they're talking about the glory that's coming into the world, and they're talking about how praise, all this should be just extreme joy, and we see that joy take place in the shepherds when they take off running This happens now in verse 15. They take off running. They have heard the angel's message, and the idea to them is not, well, that's cool. Boy, that's neat. I wonder if we're going to have a Christmas Eve service now. That's not their thought. When they hear the angel's message, they take off running because they say, A, I want to see this, and then B, I'm going to tell everybody I can about this. Boy, I want to see it, and I want to tell everybody about it. The shepherds didn't just hear the words of the angels, but they acted upon them. Friends, you and I are looking at a story, and this is verses 15 through 20, where we see the actions of people because of the message of God. And it's the action that I want us to focus on. If you went to the doctor right now, and the doctor told you, you need to take this medicine, lose weight, and work out for 20 minutes a day, how many of you would do it? I don't need you to raise your hands. I already know the answer. I know the answer because I'm the one who also has been told, take this medicine, lose weight, work out 20 minutes a day. And you know what? It doesn't always happen. You can look this up. This is a statistic I'll be happy to share with you. 20 to 30% of people do not get their medications filled that the doctor's prescribed. Now, I'm one of those people too, because I'm like, do I really need it? I don't even take a Tylenol. I have a headache. I'm like, we'll tough it out. We'll make it. 20 to 30% of the people statistically will not fill their prescription. Doctor says, hey, you need this. It's gonna help you feel better. And then it's believed that 50% of the people, up to 50, I should say, will not take the medicine if they get it filled. You know the cure. You know the way to stop whatever you're dealing with. And yet, we don't do it. How often does that happen in our spiritual life? I know how to build a closer relationship to God. Well, I better be praying. I better be reading His Word. I better be hanging out with church folk. I know some things to do to grow spiritually. And I believe ultimately that this is a relationship where God is calling us. I believe that this is a way that God is working in us. The Spirit is the connection here. But I know how to work on that connection. I know how to have a better relationship with God, how to be closer to Him. Boy, but how much time do I give to reading? How much time do I give to praying? How much time do I give to caring and loving for other people? All of these are things that I could do. Matter of fact, what's the greatest commandment? And then there's a second one. Someone tell me the second one. Love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's easy, isn't it? I think of the lowly and the outcast, and I think that that's my neighbor who I've been called to love in such a way that I love them like they're my own. That means that I think his name was Mike, if I remember correctly. He was down here at the intersection. That means I got to love him. And the only way I know his name is because one day I realized I didn't have cash, but that I should do something. So I rolled my window down and I told him, I said, I don't have cash. I said, but I can pray for you. Sometimes what people want, what the lowly and the outcast want, what people who don't have a community want, is they just want to be acknowledged as a person. They just want someone who will look at them and will realize that they are valuable in some respect, because so many people today are looked at as valueless. If you don't bring such a return to the world, you're worthless. And if you disappear, no one's going to know. And for people in those places, all they want is to know that they have a value. James chapter 1, verse 22. Don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves, but do what it says. The message of the Messiah coming to these shepherds calls us to action as well.